Lieutenant Commander Ayanna Freeman grew up in a small brick house on a busy block in Baltimore. Her mother, Patricia, worked 2 jobs. She cleaned offices at night and sold homemade pastries at the local market during the day. From the time Ayanna was little, she watched her mother wake before dawn, tie her shoes quietly so as not to wake Ayanna and her brother Malik, and slip out the door with a can of coffee in her hand. Ayanna would rub her eyes and imagine a day when she would help her mother find more rest. She dreamed of a life that reached beyond their neighborhood, a life of purpose and honor. School was never easy for Ayanna. The classrooms were old, with chipped paint and broken desks. Sometimes the lights flickered and went out, and the students would sigh and wait in darkness until a teacher found a flashlight. Despite these challenges, Ayanna was determined to learn. She read every book she could find at the library. She discovered stories of explorers, astronauts, and heroes who changed the world. She held each book tightly and wondered if she, too, could leave a mark someday. Her favorite story was about an astronaut who had trained for years to walk on the moon. Ayanna admired the courage and discipline it took to face space, a place so empty and strange. At home, Ayanna helped her mother however she could. She would wash dishes after school, help Malik with his homework, and sometimes bake cookies to sell at the market stall alongside her mother's pies. They did not have much money, but they had each other. Ayanna learned early that hard work, kindness, and resilience carried a person further than any privilege. She felt pride when a customer smiled at her mother's warm apple pie. She felt the same pride when someone praised her own batch of chocolate chip cookies. It taught her that effort and care mattered more than where you came from. In high school, a Navy recruiter visited during an assembly. He spoke about leadership, honor, and serving the country. Ayanna listened closely, her heart pounding with excitement. He said that the Navy ROCQ program could help students pay for college and build skills in discipline, teamwork, and service. Ayanna remembered her mother's worried face when she told her about the possibility of joining. Patricia feared for her daughter's safety. But Ayanna promised to work hard and stay safe, to always return home. Her promise soothed her mother's worries enough for Patricia to sign the papers, the day Ayanna received her scholarship letter from the United States Naval Academy was one of the proudest days of her life. She ran into the kitchen, waving the paper like a victory flag. Her mother dropped her spoon, and Malik nearly knocked over his juice in surprise. There were tears of joy, hugs, and laughter. For the first time, Ayanna saw her mother rest a little easier, and she felt a surge of hope. This scholarship was more than money for college, it was a ticket to a new world. At Annapolis, Ayanna found herself surrounded by so many bright and driven students. She felt both thrilled and a little intimidated. The campus was vast, with green lawns, white buildings, and the Chesapeake Bay shining in the distance. She made friends with other midshipmen who came from towns and cities all over the country. They studied together, shared late-night snacks, and challenged one another in physical training. Ayanna learned quickly that teamwork was more than just working side by side. It was about trust, loyalty, and carrying each other when one fell behind. Academics at the academy were tough. Ayanna spent long nights in the library, reading textbooks on engineering, history, and navigation. She learned nautical skills, how to chart courses across the sea, and how to read the stars. She practiced drills on the parade grounds before sunrise and held her balance steady as she marched in perfect formation. Every detail mattered. She kept her uniform neat, her shoes polished, and her mind sharp. She knew that every small task prepared her for bigger challenges ahead. After graduation, Ayanna faced another test. Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL training, known as BUD-S. Many cadets did not make it through. The instructors pushed them to their limits in ways that fought both mind and body. They ran on sand while waves crashed at their feet, carried logs heavier than themselves, and swam through cold, dark water at night. The training was designed to break them down so only the strongest, most determined candidates would rise back, up. Ayanna remembered the first time she saw the instructors' stern faces. She felt her heart race, but she also felt a fierce resolve that burned deep inside her. Some days her body ached so much she doubted she could go on.
Oh.
Her shoulders burned. For From carrying the log, her legs trembled after endless runs, and her lungs felt on fire from the cold swims. But every time she felt like giving up, she thought of her mother and Malik waiting at home. She remembered their smiles, their hope in her, and she found new strength, reminded herself that quitting would mean giving up on their dreams, too. So she pressed on, counting each stroke in the water, each step in the sand. She spoke quietly to herself. One more, just one more. Slowly but surely, Ayana proved herself. She learned to navigate obstacles without fear. She learned to breathe calmly even when the ocean waves tossed her around. She learned to depend on her teammates, pulling them out of the water when they grew tired, offering words of encouragement when their spirits sank. In return, they supported her, lifted her up when her own strength wavered, and reminded her that together they were unstoppable. When the final exercise came up, long swim across a bay in the early morning, Chiliana showed the most grit. Her cold-soaked body ached, but she kept her strokes steady and focused on the shore. When she climbed out of the water, dripping and exhausted, she saw the pride in her fellow trainees' faces. She had not only finished, she had led them. She had earned the title she would carry forward. After weeks of training, the candidates stood before the instructors to receive their tridents, the symbol of their entry into the Navy SEALs community. When Ayana's name was called, she stepped forward in her uniform, the metal cold against her chest as she pinned on the trident. Around her, her new brothers in arms clapped and cheered. She felt a surge of emotion, joy, relief, and an overwhelming sense of belonging. She was no longer just Ayana from Baltimore. She was Ace, the SEAL sniper. The years that followed saw Ayana deploy on missions around the world. She kept her record clean and her focus sharp. In each operation, she demonstrated the calm precision that would become her trademark. She never let fear cloud her judgment, and she never let doubt slow her aim. Her fellow SEALs learned to trust her unconditionally, knowing she would watch their backs in the most dangerous moments. Back home, word of Ayana's achievements spread. Patricia and Malik would watch the news with pride, telling neighbors, friends, and strangers about the girl from Baltimore who became a Navy SEAL sniper. They spoke softly, careful not to draw too much attention, but their pride shone bright. Ayana's success became a beacon of hope for her old neighborhood, showing that with hard work one could rise above the harshest challenges. Through it all, Ayana remained humble. She knew that every medal, every honor, was the product of her mother's sacrifices, her own perseverance, and the support of her teammates. Each morning, she would wake before dawn, just as she had long ago at home, tie her boots quietly, and step out, ready to face another day. And so, the rising tide of Ayana Ace Freeman's life moved forward, steady, strong, and determined, carrying her toward the pivotal moments that would test her spirit and ultimately define her legacy. Lieutenant Commander Ayana Freeman stepped out of the black SUV into the bright morning light. The courthouse stood tall before her, its stone walls gleaming under the sun. She smoothed the front of her dress blues and took a steady breath. What a day. She would testify in a hearing about a mission overseas. She had prepared for this day. But nothing could calm the flutter in her chest as she climbed the steps. Inside, the marble floors echoed with her boots. Lawyers and spectators filled the waiting area, murmuring in hushed tones. Freeman's eyes stayed forward. She carried herself with quiet confidence, each step measured. A court clerk checked her credentials, then led her through heavy wooden doors into the courtroom. The ceiling soared above them, and tall windows let in streams of light. Freeman paused for a moment, letting the sunlight warm her face. She whispered a silent promise to herself. Stay strong. Speak the truth. The judge entered next, a stern-looking man in a black robe. He sat at the bench, papers neatly stacked before him. To Freeman's left, a group of officers stood at attention. To her right, a circle of chairs held the defense attorneys, their faces serious. Everybody watched as Freeman walked to the witness stand. The bailiff helped her up and handed her a Bible. She placed one hand on it and lifted the other, her voice clear and calm as she swore to tell the truth. The defense attorney rose. He adjusted his glasses and smiled thinly. "Lieutenant Commander Freeman," he began, his tone polite but cool. "You led your sniper team during Operation Irontide, is that correct?" Freeman nodded. "Yes, sir." Flipped through his folder, scanning the pages. "You were ordered to hold your fire when civilians entered the compound, correct?" She took a breath. "That is correct. We followed the rules of engagement." The attorney leaned forward. "Yet, your own after-action report says you fired 3 shots after the order. Care to explain?" At that moment, Freeman felt the room tilt slightly. Her mind flashed back to that night under the stars. The weight of responsibility on her shoulders, and the split-second decision she made when a threat emerged. She knew the rules were clear, but in the field, moments became seconds, and seconds became lifetimes. She steadied her voice. "Fired. When the target moved toward a building with armed insurgents. I believed we had regained positive identification of the threat." Stir went through the courtroom. Spectators shifted in their seats, whispering. The judge raised an eyebrow. The defense attorney closed his folder. "Judge, in light of this, I request that the witness be restrained. We cannot risk another outburst or tampering." Freeman's heart sank. An outburst? Tampering? She looked down at her uniform, at the ribbons that told her story of honor and sacrifice. She had never broken the rules. She had given her all. Yet here she was, treated as if she might lash out. The judge tapped his gavel. "Bailiff, secure the witness." The bailiff approached Freeman, his expression respectful but firm. He took out a pair of handcuffs. Freeman's pulse raced. She glanced toward the officers beside her. Their faces were unreadable. She closed her eyes for a moment. Then she opened them, her jaw set. She would face this with the same calm she showed in combat. The handcuffs clicked around her wrists. He felt cold against her skin. A hush fell over the room. Spectators craned their necks. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment on live feed. And in news reports, Freeman held her ground, standing straight even as the metal bit into her wrists. She gathered her thoughts and focused on the next step. Speak her truth. The defense attorney smiled. "Thank you, Your Honor." He sat down, folding his hands. Judge Carter's eyes narrowed. "Lieutenant Commander Freeman, you may proceed with your testimony, but you will remain in restraints until further notice." Freeman lifted her chin. The handcuffs made her arms heavy, but she forced her shoulders back. She spoke clearly. "On the night of June 12, 2024, our team encountered armed combatants outside this compound. We identified them through night vision scopes. At that moment, civilians emerged from a side entrance unarmed and unaware of the situation. I gave the order to hold fire. Moments later, the combatants positioned themselves behind the building with hostages. I made a split-second decision to neutralize the threat before they could harm innocent people." Her voice was steady, but inside, her heart thundered. Every eye in the room was on her bound hands, on her face. She felt the collective weight of judgment and doubt. When she finished, the judge leaned forward. "Defense? Any further questions?" The defense attorney shook his head, closed his folder, and sat back. Freeman exhaled quietly. She looked at the judge. "That is all, Your Honor." The judge nodded. "Thank you, Lieutenant Commander. You may step down." As Freeman climbed down from the stand, the bailiff unlocked the handcuffs. The metal fell to the floor with a soft clatter. She flexed her wrists, feeling the blood return. She offered a brief nod to the judge and turned toward her own attorneys. Their faces showed relief and pride. They quietly moved to stand beside her. Outside the courtroom, the hallway buzzed. Reporters crowded the entrance, cameras rolling. Freeman's legal team guided her through the sea of microphones. She answered questions with a calm firmness, her eyes straight ahead. She did not mention the handcuffs or the injustice she felt. She spoke only of her commitment to duty and the importance of following the rules of engagement under pressure. That night, back at her temporary quarters, Freeman sat at a small desk, the weight of the day settling in. She removed her boots and rubbed her wrists. The mark of the handcuffs had left faint red lines. She closed her eyes and thought of her mother. She imagined Patricia's warm smile and the smell of apple pie drifting through their kitchen. She promised herself that she would tell her mother everything once this was over. Freeman picked up her laptop and began typing her personal journal. She wanted to record every detail while it was fresh. She wrote about the courtroom's marble floors, the judge's stern look, the clink of the handcuffs, and the raw tension in the air. She wrote about the faces in the gallery, some curious, some doubtful, some sympathetic. She let her pen flow freely, capturing each moment with honesty. As she wrote, Freeman felt a sense of calm return. Writing helped her sort her thoughts. Separate fact from emotion. She told herself that truth would win in the end. She had served her country with honor. She had faced danger with courage. She had followed her training and the rules she held sacred. The next morning, Freeman awoke. With the sunrise, she dressed in her uniform once more and prepared to return to the courthouse. This time, she would face any remaining questions without fear. She clipped her hair back, adjusted her collar, and took a final look in the mirror. Her eyes were clear, her jaw firm. She carried no anger, only resolve. Freeman knew the hearing would continue. She did not know what lay ahead. But she trusted in her own integrity and in the support of her fellow SEALs. She thought of their smiles, their shared jokes, and the way they had pulled together during training. She thought of Admiral Grace Caldwell, who had mentored her and believed in her potential. She felt a surge of confidence. The metal of those handcuffs could not hold her spirit with that thought. Freeman stepped out into the morning light again. The courthouse loomed before her, but this time she felt ready. She would face the shadows in the courtroom with the same calm she showed on the battlefield. And she knew that, in time, the truth would shine through. The moment the handcuffs clicked closed on Freeman's wrists, the hush in the courtroom grew heavy, all eyes fixed on her, as if the metal binding her felt stronger than the steel of her uniform. She stood tall, refusing to let her shoulders slump under the weight of embarrassment. Inside, her heart raced like a drum, but she kept her face calm and steady as the hearing recessed for lunch. News crews crowded the courthouse steps. Cameras rolled and microphones hovered near Freeman's legal team. Reporters called her name in rapid-fire questions. Lieutenant Commander Freeman, how do you feel about being handcuffed? Do you think the judge treated you fairly? Will this incident affect your testimony? Attorneys politely blocked the cameras, escorting her through the side exit. Freeman nodded to reporters but stayed silent. Every flash of a camera reminded her that millions would see this image. A decorated Navy SEAL, bound and judged. Within minutes, video clips of Freeman in handcuffs spread across social media. On one platform, a post showed her standing proudly even as the bailiff locked the cuffs. The caption read, "When honor meets injustice." It went viral fast. Comments poured in. Some praised her bravery. "She's a hero," one user wrote. "I can't believe they treated her that way," wrote another.
Oh.
Other comments were harsh. "She must have done something wrong to deserve that," a few wrote. Still, the majority stood in support, sharing stories of other service members facing unfair treatment. Freeman watched some of the clips later that afternoon. She sat on a bench in the courthouse garden, the sun warm on her back. She scrolled on her phone, reading the messages. The supportive ones brought a small relief, like cool water on a hot day. The harsh ones felt like stings, but she reminded herself that anger often came from misunderstanding. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She had faced danger. In combat, this was another kind of battle. Inside the courthouse, word of Freeman's treatment spread quickly among the officers and staff. Some expressed outrage, knocking fists on tables and shaking their heads. Others whispered about filing formal complaints. A group of her fellow SEALs gathered in a conference room just off the main hall. They spoke in low voices, glancing at photos on their phones. These men and women had trained with Freeman and knew her dedication, and watching her humiliated made their blood boil. Chief Petty Officer Ramirez slammed his fist on the table. "Who gave the order to cuff her? Data. Not how we treat our own." Lieutenant Harris leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "We need to show up tomorrow in uniform. Let's fill these benches. Let's remind them who she is." Someone nodded. "No, we should write to the Navy Times. Get this story straight." A plan formed. They would stand together, hand in hand, a silent show of solidarity. Meanwhile, in the courtroom, the judge called everyone back to order. Freeman's eyes adjusted to the glare of the overhead lights. She felt the tension in the air, thick as smoke. The defense attorney rose again. He looked at Freeman with a quiet confidence. "Lieutenant Commander, I have a few follow-up questions." Freeman steadied herself and answered each question with clarity. She felt the handcuffs pull at her wrists, but she refused to let them slow her words. After the hearing ended for the day, Freeman walked down the aisle with her attorneys. Her head stayed high. Porters waited again outside, but she spoke only with her legal team. "We did our best today," her lead attorney said softly. Freeman nodded. She was proud of how she had held the room. She knew her words had clear power, even if the handcuffs tried to distract the judge and jury. That evening, Freeman joined her small circle of mentors and friends at the Navy Lodge. They had made a quiet dinner table in the back, away from the eyes of strangers. Admiral Grace Caldwell, the woman who would later enter the courtroom, sat at the head of the table. Her posture was straight, her gaze wise and gentle. She reached out and placed a hand on Freeman's shoulder. "Tell me how you feel," she said. Freeman took a deep breath and let the story spill out. The judge's order. The click of the handcuffs, the faces in the gallery, the glare of the cameras. She spoke honestly, allowing herself a few tears to explain how humiliation cut deeper than fear. Caldwell listened without judgment. When Freeman paused, the Admiral squeezed her shoulder. "You did everything right," she said. "No person, no judge can strip away your honor. They can only reveal their own flaws." At that moment, Freeman felt a swell of gratitude. She realized she was not alone, even though the world had seen her bound. Here were people who saw her true strength. She wiped her eyes and smiled. "Thank you," she whispered. The next morning, Freeman stepped into the courtroom again. Her wrists were free, but the memory of the cuffs lingered. Spectators filled the benches. The defense attorney rose, ready to continue. Suddenly, the doors at the back swung open, and Admiral Caldwell walked in. A hush fell. All heads turned. The Admiral, in her own dress uniform, moved toward the bench with quiet confidence. Freeman looked up and met Caldwell's eyes. In that moment, her spirit lifted. She stood a little taller. She knew Caldwell had come to make sure justice held strong. The judge cleared his throat. "Lieutenant Commander Freeman, I understand you are no longer restrained. You may proceed." Sound of the metal hitting the floor echoed like a small victory as Freeman resumed her testimony. She felt the courtroom change. The tension still pulsed, but there was respect now. The jury leaned forward. The judge watched closely. Even the defense attorney spoke with gentler tones. Freeman's voice rang clear, each word a precise cadence born of her training and her heart. After she finished, the judge thanked her. She stepped down from the stand and saw Caldwell nod at her. The moment was brief, but Freeman carried it with her. It felt like the beginning of her true vindication. Outside the courthouse, the media frenzy had grown. Headlines read, "Seal. Sniper humiliated in court, and Admiral's heroic stand for justice." Freeman's story became a symbol of fairness and respect. The Navy announced a review of courtroom procedures to protect witnesses from unnecessary restraints. Lawmakers took notice, promising to debate changes to military hearing rules. Freeman's personal trial became a catalyst for change. Back in her quarters that night, Freeman sat at her desk and picked up her journal. She dated the entry and wrote 2 new sentences. "I felt small in those handcuffs, but I found my voice when they fell away. Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones we fight for our own dignity." She closed the journal and turned off the lamp. As she lay down, her thoughts drifted to tomorrow. She knew the hearing would continue, but she felt ready. No matter what came, she carried the support of her mother's faith, her teammates' loyalty, and an admiral's unyielding respect. And with that, she drifted toward sleep, dreaming of a day when no service member would stand bound and alone in a courtroom again. Lieutenant Commander Freeman stood at the witness stand, her wrists freshly freed from the cold bite of handcuffs. The metal lay on the wooden floor, a quiet reminder of yesterday's humiliation. Her voice echoed in the hushed courtroom as she finished answering the defense attorney's final question. She felt the weight lift now that her hands were free. The tension still crackled in the air like static before a storm. Across the room, the judge shuffled papers, his brow furrowed. As he reviewed the notes, the defense attorney gave a small nod and sank back into his chair, eyes never leaving Freeman's. The prosecutor sat at a table nearby, glancing toward the gallery where spectators whispered among themselves. Some faces were sympathetic, others skeptical, and all seemed to hang on the next moment. Freeman's own legal team stood quietly behind her, their expressions a mix of relief and readiness. They knew the next questions might be tougher, and they needed every advantage. Freeman took a slow breath. She reminded herself of her training focus on the mission. Trust her instincts. Speak only what she knew to be true. Suddenly, the double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. A hush swept through the room as if an unseen wind had passed over. Heads turned in unison. Framed in the doorway stood Admiral Grace Caldwell. She wore her dress uniform, flawless and proud, the rows of ribbons and medals gleaming under the high courtroom lights. Her posture was commanding, yet calm like the eye of a hurricane holding firm while chaos swirled around. Every person present seemed to freeze. The defense attorney's pen stilled in midair. The prosecutor lifted his head, startled. Even the judge sat up straighter, his gavel forgotten for a moment. Spectators leaned forward, eyes wide, breath caught in their throats. They had heard stories of Admiral Caldwell's fierce leadership in the Navy, but few had seen her in person. Now, here she was, miles from a warship, walking barefoot across the courtroom carpet to stand directly before the bench. Freeman's heart pounded, but she did not look away. She felt Caldwell's gaze settle on her, a steady beam of support that made her feel seen, protected. For a moment, memory flipped back 2 months ago, when Caldwell first visited the SEAL training grounds. She had encouraged Freeman then, guiding her through rough waters of doubt with a few firm words and an unwavering belief in her ability. That memory steadied Freeman now. The judge cleared his throat, his voice softer than before. "Admiral Caldwell," he said, standing, "to what do we owe the honor of your presence?" Caldwell inclined her head with grace. Her voice carried the authority of someone who had seen storms and commanded fleets through them. "Your Honor," she began, "I come not as a spectator, but as a steward of justice and honor. Lieutenant Commander Freeman has served her country with exceptional courage and unwavering integrity. The events of this hearing have placed her in a position no service member should face, public humiliation bound in metal. Respectfully request that her restraints be permanently removed and that her testimony be heard without distraction." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge's eyes widened, then narrowed as he processed the request. The defense attorney rose, clearing his throat. "Your Honor, Admiral Caldwell, with all due respect, I made my motion based on concerns of security and procedure." He gestured toward the empty handcuffs. "But since those restraints are no longer in use, I have no further objection to her proceeding unencumbered." Caldwell nodded and turned her calm attention back to the judge. "Lieutenant Commander Freeman stands before you with an unbroken record of service and discipline. To question her without just cause is to question the values we hold dear in the Navy and in our nation." She paused, letting her words settle like stones dropped in still water. "I trust this court will show the same respect and dignity to her as she has shown to our country." The judge sank back into his chair, studying Caldwell's face with newfound respect. He tapped his gavel lightly. "So ordered, Lieutenant. Commander Freeman shall proceed without restraint or interruption." With a firm nod, he added, "We welcome you, Admiral Caldwell, as a witness to this hearing. You may be seated." Caldwell walked down the side aisle toward an empty chair near the prosecutor's table. Each step she took rippled through the room, steady and sure. Spectators watched as she sat, folding her hands in her lap. The gallery's chatter hushed completely. Even the clerk paused in her work. All eyes now returned to Freeman. Freeman felt a swell of relief. She raised her chin and steadied her shoulders. The small ache in her wrists had faded, replaced by a quiet determination. She knew that Caldwell's presence shifted the room's energy. Now, when she spoke, they would hear more than the cold metal, more than the defense's attempts to undermine her. They would hear a decorated sniper, a leader shaped by sacrifice, standing firm on her own truth. The prosecutor stood and adjusted his glasses. "Lieutenant Commander," he said, "let us proceed with completing your testimony. Please describe in detail the sequence of events after you gave the hold fire order." Freeman centered herself. She imagined the night in question, the moonlight on the compound's walls, the hiss of static in her earpiece, the sudden flicker of movement. She saw the insurgents taking position. She felt the weight of her rifle, laser sight locked on. The threat. She spoke calmly, each sentence clear and measured. "After I ordered hold fire, we maintained visual contact on the civilians as they exited. At the same time, our team observed the armed combatants re-emerging behind the building. They moved quickly, taking cover behind concrete barriers. I radioed in a request for clarification from command, but the delay in communication left my team and me in direct danger. With positively identified hostile forces aiming to use the building's roof as an overwatch position against our forces, I made the decision to engage to protect innocent bystanders and fellow service members." Freeman described the events. She noticed Caldwell leaning forward, listening intently. Each detail passed from Freeman's lips was backed by calm precision. The defense attorney whispered notes to himself, but his confident smirk had faded. The jury scribbled in their pads, eyes fixed on Freeman's steady gaze. When Freeman finished, the prosecutor nodded respectfully. "Thank you, Lieutenant Commander. No further questions." He sat down, and a hush blanketed the room once more. The judge looked first at the defense attorney. He remained seated, no more objections. The judge then turned to Caldwell. "Admiral, do you wish to add anything to the record?" Caldwell rose, her stance respectful yet authoritative. "Only this, Lieutenant Commander. Freeman embodies the highest standards of our Navy. Her decisions in the field reflect not recklessness, but courage guided by the rule of law. I urge this court to recognize the gravity of the split second, choices made by those in harm's way, and to judge her service with fairness and gratitude." She sat again, and the gallery broke into soft applause. Freeman allowed herself a small smile, her eyes glistening with unshed gratitude. The applause spread slowly, touching the rows of officers in the nearest section before echoing through the benches. The judge rapped his gavel. "Order in the court." His voice was firm but carried warmth. "We will reconvene tomorrow to hear closing statements. This court is adjourned." As the gavel fell, Freeman felt a wave of relief so strong it almost knocked her off balance. Caldwell rose and approached her, fastening a gentle hand on Freeman's shoulder. "You did well," she whispered. Freeman nodded, voice caught in her throat. Outside, reporters clustered around the courtroom doors, cameras flashing. Freeman and Caldwell emerged together. Caldwell answered a few questions before turning to Freeman. "You should speak your own words," she said softly. Freeman nodded, stepping forward to face the waiting microphones. When Freeman spoke, her voice was strong but humble. She thanked her fellow service members for their support, honored the civilians caught in the conflict, and spoke of her hope that truth and dignity would prevail in every corner of the military justice system. Her words were honest and measured, reflecting the calm that had carried her through the hearing. Later that evening, Freeman lay in bed thinking of the day's events. She felt weary, but also a bright spark of hope. Yesterday, Handcuffs had symbolized her trial. Today, an Admiral's entrance had symbolized her vindication. She closed her eyes, breathing in the steady rhythm of her own heart, and drifted into a sleep filled with promise that the final day of the hearing would bring full justice at last. The judge's gavel fell, and a hush washed over the courtroom. Lieutenant Commander Ayanna Freeman stood at the front, her posture straight, her eyes steady. The judge cleared his throat and spoke in a firm voice. "All charges against Lieutenant Commander Freeman are dismissed. She is free to go." At that moment, the tension in the room broke like a dam. Applause rose, soft at first, then louder as officers, attorneys, and spectators all stood to cheer. Some wiped tears, others saluted. Freeman felt her chest tighten with relief and pride. She looked at Admiral Caldwell, who nodded with a proud smile, and then back at her own team, who beamed at her. Outside the courtroom, a crowd waited. News cameras flashed, capturing the moment Freeman stepped into the light. Reporters called her name, but she focused on her legal team. They guided her toward a small raised platform where a microphone stood. Freeman's heart pounded, but her voice was calm when she spoke. "Thank you to this court for seeing the truth. Thank you to my fellow service members for standing by me. Most of all, thank you to my family." She paused, thinking of her mother and brother. She spoke of honor, of duty, and of the need to treat every service member with respect. The crowd listened in silence, hanging on her words. Later that day, Freeman found herself in a quiet corner of the Navy building. A small group of lawmakers and senior officers had gathered to discuss new rules. They spoke of how no one in uniform should be handcuffed in civilian court unless there was clear danger. They talked of dignity, of fairness, and of how Freeman's case shone a light on a serious gap in policy. A congressman made notes promising to draft a bill that protected witnesses like Freeman. A Navy captain spoke of updating training for military judges. As Freeman listened, she felt humbled. She had never sought fame, but now her struggle would help protect others. That evening, back at her quarters, Freeman opened her laptop. She typed a thank you email to everyone who had supported her, the attorneys, her fellow SEALs, Admiral Caldwell, and even the friendly courthouse staff. She wrote slowly, choosing each word with care. She pressed send, and then closed the laptop. She sat for a moment in the dim light, breathing in the quiet. The events of the past days felt both distant and vivid. She thought of the handcuffs, the judge's bench, the judge's words of dismissal. She thought of the applause, the cheers, and the sense of right finally winning out. The next morning, Freeman rose early. She dressed in her uniform and pinned on her trident and ribbons. She checked her reflection and adjusted her collar. Today, she would visit a Bud's graduation ceremony as a guest speaker, she remembered. Her own first Bud's graduation, the day she earned her trident. How young and hopeful she had felt then. Now, she would walk those same halls as a decorated officer who had faced her own trial in a very different kind of court. At the training center, trainees lined up on the parade field. Their faces were serious, but their eyes shone with pride. They wore sweaty uniforms and carried rifles as they stood at attention. Freeman walked to the podium and tapped the microphone. Silence fell. She looked out at the group and smiled gently. "Congratulations," she began. "You have pushed your bodies and minds further than you thought possible. You have learned to trust in yourselves and in your teammates. You have earned the right to wear the trident." She paused as the trainees cheered and clapped. She spoke of courage and integrity. She told them about her recent hearing, how she had stood handcuffed in a packed courtroom, judged unfairly despite her service. She spoke softly but with strength. "In that moment, I felt small. I found my voice when the handcuffs fell away. I learned that standing by the truth is the greatest form of courage." The trainees listened intently. When she finished, they broke into a cheer that echoed across the field. Freeman felt a warmth spread through her chest. After the ceremony, a young trainee approached her. His name was Petty Officer First Class Davis. He told her that watching her speak had given him hope. "I was scared I wouldn't make it through," he confessed. "But hearing you made me believe in myself." Freeman knelt beside him and smiled. "Trust your training," she said. "Trust your heart. You belong here." He saluted, and she returned it with pride. That afternoon, Freeman returned home to her mother's house. The door opened before she could knock. Patricia hugged her daughter tightly, tears in her eyes. Malik stood behind, grinning.
Right.
Inside, the kitchen smelled of fresh apples and cinnamon. They all sat at the small table, and Patricia passed around warm slices of pie. Freeman felt a joy she had not felt in days. She told them about the graduation, the policy changes, and the support she had received. Patricia listened quietly, her pride shining. "You've always been strong," she said softly. "Stronger than anyone knows." Later that night, Freeman sat alone on the back porch. The sky was clear, the stars bright above. She closed her eyes and breathed in the cool air. She thought of every step of her journey from the crowded streets of Baltimore to the halls of Annapolis. From the grueling Bud-S training to the battlefield and back, she thought of the court, the handcuffs, and the Admiral who had stood by her. She realized that every challenge had shaped her, teaching her resilience and compassion. She opened her eyes and whispered into the night, "I am ready for whatever comes next." In that moment, she felt light and strong, like the tide rising to meet the moon. She knew her fight had made a difference, not just for herself, but for every service member who might one day face a similar trial. And she understood that true honor was not only in bearing arms for her country, but in standing up for justice and dignity, even when the world seemed against her. With that thought, Freeman rose and stepped back into the house. The lights were warm inside, and the sound of her family's laughter greeted her. She smiled, feeling at home in a way she never had before. She knew that her story was not the end, but another beginning. The next mission might take her to distant shores, but her heart would carry these lessons always: courage without cruelty, strength without pride, and a commitment to lift others up, just as she had been lifted when she needed it most. And so, Lieutenant Commander Ayanna Ace Freeman moved forward, ready to face new challenges with her head held high and her spirit unbroken.